Voila. Right. Here we go. Here we go. Hello, everyone again. Right. I thought what I would do today is look at the phases that Weston has really pushed itself ahead. Obviously, when it started in the late Georgian period, Victorian period, Edwardian period, and then what I consider very much to be the heyday of the interwars period, that period between the end of the First War, beginning of the Second. As a result of the war and changes post-war, this is Second War, things in Weston took an inevitable turn for the economic worse. And we've never quite recovered from that. And I still think Weston today doesn't quite know whether it's a seaside town or a town which just happens to be by the seaside. It hasn't worked out its role with comfort. Where certainly in that interwars period, Weston was very comfortable with itself, very comfortable indeed, and I'll explain why I think that's so. Perhaps we are becoming more comfortable in this late era. Even photographically, it's now possible to have comfort in something which is very modern. Is this showing a change? I don't know. We'll have to come back in 50 years and reflect on it and see whether this is a comfortable period. So, book your lecture 50 years from now.
Are you still here, John?
I intend being here. We shall see. So, let's move on. What I want to do is look at very briefly the Georgian period. Just to recap, the first hotel, the Royal Hotel, or the hotel, opened in 1810. A very, very short esplanade then opened in 1826 up between Knightstone and the Thatched Cottage. And it was no more than a gravel track. We couldn't call it a promenade by any stretch of the imagination, but it was Weston's first attempt to put some sort of walkway that visitors could wander along. Then, of course, the real spurting growth comes during the Victorian period, post-railway. The effect of the railway, we begin to see great engineering advances, the opening of Burnbeck Pier in 1864, and then what I think must be the crowning glory of that era, the building of the promenade, all the way from Burnbeck right the way down to what we now call Royal Sands in 1885. And you imagine a town the size of Weston as it then was, raising a rate in order to build that enormous engineering project, and against the vitriol of the public. The public was up in arms about the amount of money being spent. But the council was made of sterner stuff than councils tend to be nowadays, and said, okay, we've listened to you, but we're carrying on, we will build it. And what a great thing they did. Then we come into the Edwardian period, where we see a different approach from the Victorian period, a much more frivolous approach, things like the Grand Pier, Knightstone Theatre, Knightstone Baths, and lots of bandstands, lots of theatres. In a way, it sort of reflects the jollity of the Fat King, Edward the Seventh. Actually, that's what it does. And then the whole thing takes a turn for the worse. First World War breaks out. But as with all wartime, seasides actually benefit from national disaster. What we need in a seaside is a jolly good war, because that brings people in who can't afford to go abroad. So Weston needs another war to make sure people... sorry, I'm being recorded. I didn't mean that. And then, of course, during the war, end of the First War, beginning of the Second War, we do have that final fling of real self-confidence. So let's just remind ourselves. Here we've got a very early idea of Weston. the new parish church, Villa Rosa, this huge Italianate pile, which is now that block of flats. Victoria Buildings and Albert Buildings and Prince's Buildings, still there now. This is where the Seawood Hotel is. Claremont here, Knightstone there, and the town beginning to spread along here. You can see the track going out of the road. Obviously this is a train going along the main line. So this is just after Brunel brings the railway into Weston, 1841. Brentnor looking as though it's a volcano, which it isn't, it never was, but there we are. And I always find looking at prints interesting because what you're doing is seeing through the eyes of the people then how they thought of their town. So you will see lots of extremely well-dressed Victorian people in their prints, rather than in the photographs. And here you see, again, an idealised print of the bathing machines, the sea. No stretch of the imagination could you say there's a promenade. And this is where, this today would be the Beach Hotel, Grand Pier would be coming out here. This is very much, it's almost a rural setting, isn't it, with the land going down to the beach. And don't forget, of course, the sand dunes came all the way from uphill right the way up to at least the thatched cottage. So it wasn't anything like a promenade or an esplanade. And I've taken some of these paintings, which are from the museum, just to illustrate how people perceive Weston then. 1848, the railway has just come. The perspective here is hopeless. I mean, this will be the National School, St John's School, so this is West Street here. This is the parish church. Yes, it's not good art, but it's all we have. So there it is, 1848 by this person, Robert Gregory, who was actually a builder. And then we begin to understand the idea of the need for an esplanade, a walkway along from. Here you can see a very basic track is being set up around what we would now call Marine Lake, but then of course was Glentworth Bay. And you can see in this print quite clearly how the sand dunes carry on all the way up into what we now consider the town. St John's, the parish church there, Emmanuel, the second church there, Villa Rosa, this great Italianate pile up on the hill, and around the corner here you can see Birnbeck Island, or is it Knightstone Island? Can't tell from here. Plus the bathing machines, people riding on the beach, people walking on the beach, and people promenading along the track. But again, it's hardly what we would recognise as a promenade. And still we're into the prints. You can see, I think I've shown you this one before. On the left, Dr. Fox's bathhouse, Arthur's Tower, the hotel next to it on Knightstone, and this field is the open space between Royal Crescent, Greenfield Place, and Park Place. The land which had private access only for those who lived in properties abutting it. So this was a great thing about Weston. I'll deal with that in the final lecture, how people who lived in these great terraces and crescents couldn't quite afford to have really big gardens, but they could afford it communally. And so it gave the impression of grandeur, but it wasn't quite accurate. Weston was never quite up in that league, but it did a pretty good job of giving the right impression. This today is the water park, so if you've not got your bearings. And ooh, that was too quick. Right, this print I do like because it shows in graphic detail now the new seafront area. We're coming down here. This would be Claremont. Coming along here, the Seawood Hotel there. This would be Park Place. This is Royal Terrace, the Cabot pub there. And sweeping around now towards what today would be here. Indeed, this is the field where the Winter Gardens stands. And what you can see here is a roadway which tumbles straight down onto the beach. Absolutely no defence from rough tides, but this is an initial attempt to create a sort of promenade, but it's not the engineered promenade which we now have. And again, the artist clearly wants to give the right impression. From this you can see it's only the right sort of people live in Weston-super-Mare, it's only the right sort of people visit Weston-super-Mare. It's only the right sort of people who are on the beach, and nobody's misbehaving, and everyone's happily married, and the children are, and the dogs aren't making a mess. It's a very idealised world. It's interesting, if you start to read newspapers of that period, you'll realise there's a different story to tell, very different story to tell. And again, you can see the view here along the promenade. Notice all of these properties. The properties are still there, of course, but in those days they all had front gardens. They were 2 stories high. Now they've all gone up a story. They've gone out a story with the sun lounge, and the gardens have become concreted, and they've lost that architectural integrity. But things change. We can't moan. Well, we can live in Weston, but I'm sure. And once again, this is obviously heading around what we would call today Marine Lake, Wentworth Bay, and clearly the right people dressed in their top hats and long dresses. This is a particular favourite. 1860, so we're talking, the railway's been here getting on for 20 years. The town is really growing. But you can see from here the seafront pathway, the esplanade as it was called before it became the promenade 25 years later. The donkeys, ubiquitous Weston, and the lads just lounging on the beach. Nothing changes. The whole point of living in the West Country is that you should be lethargic. Nobody rushes for anything. Manana. This is why we get nowhere, but we take a long time doing it. We don't die till we're very old. It's the West Country air. So long may it be. And this painting is actually in Bristol Art Gallery. And again, it just shows that idealised view of Weston, doesn't it? With the happy family, the donkey lads who are all well-fed, hearty boys who have no problems at all being very respectful. Even the donkeys are compliant in their behaviour. It's the way the Victorians loved to look at the world they thought they were creating, and if they didn't see that, Dickens was able to expose other areas that perhaps lots of other people didn't really want to see. And I've just taken bits of the paintings and put them together, and to show a fairly modern one, nothing has changed. There is still the pleasure of the beach, isn't there? And no matter how sophisticated we are and how many iPads we have, you go down onto the beach on a nice summer's day and the kids are screaming around, building sandcastles, riding donkeys and thoroughly enjoying themselves. 'Twas always so. And I'm sure people are still lounging on the beach and not bothering too much in life. Then, I don't expect you to see this in detail, but this is very, very important because this is the 1885 plan by Scone, who was a great Bristol engineer. And he is responsible for designing the promenade at Weston. This is the illustration that he produced for the council. It went into a magazine called The Building News, December the 4th, 1885. And this is the engineered. You don't need to strain your eyes. I will show each one of those bits as we go through. This is the basic plan. Up here, his cross-section, sea wall, tide here, and a slightly sloping esplanade sloping in there, and then here with the drains. That wall, incredibly, 1885, it is still the wall we have today. It has only one bit of it has ever been breached. It's an amazing bit of municipal and civil engineering. And this is the route map all the way from Birnbeck here, right the way past Knightstone, along the seafront, all the way to what was then called the sanatorium, and we would call it Royal Sands today. So in one sweeping plan, this was done. It wasn't a case of the council, the commissioners and the council then saying, oh, well, we'll build a bit of it this year, then we'll get some more rates and build a bit next year. No. We'll raise the money, we'll go to Parliament, we'll get a bill, we'll raise the capital, and we'll build it from A to Z. The alpha and the omega of the wall, it will be done. And that was real confidence in where people in Weston thought they were going. And these are the enlarged pictures from that original plan. So you can see these are Scoone's sketches of what he intended. And you'll be able to pick out exactly where these places are from his sketches. This is clearly around what today we would call Marine Lake, but then was Glensworth Bay. He designed everything, the steps, the capstones from the Forest of Dean. They were all specifically designed and cut to give a unity right the way along that stretch. Even the shelters he designed. And there's a great emphasis on shelters, which I'm afraid over the years we've allowed to morph into different things, and some of them have gone. Particularly these wonderful intricate Victorian shelters. They probably haven't been maintained, and they've got to the point where cost of repair would be so great, they just remove them and put different ones in. Even to the point of designing his railings between the pavement and the roadway. Sketch of the ladies' cloakroom, which is a nice reference for the loo. So ladies, it's got the hint of the Great Western Railway about it, hasn't it? It could be a ticket office, but you know this is Brunel's area and era. So here is a nice bit of castellated design. And an open kiosk. A kiosk, of course, wasn't for selling something, it was a shelter. Again, all part of this integrated style, so that from one end of the prom to the other, everything fitted into a style. So you could come to Weston and you would know that was the Western style. And as things have changed, it becomes increasingly difficult to work out what the style is. But then it wasn't difficult. Even a sketch of the niche, so well designed that the bench would be put here, the wall behind it high enough so that if you're sitting there and the sea is bashing against it, or there's a nasty westerly wind, you can still get your outdoor fresh air without actually facing the sea. All extremely well thought out. And the Victorians then produced a whole series of prints showing what was intended and what had been built. And I'll go through these because they are interesting again to see how they viewed what it was they were creating. So here we are at Glensworth Bay. Moving along, you can see the engineered area here. It's brand new, so there hasn't been time for vegetation to spring up. Everything is meant to be well ordered, and so it was. I mean, the workforce was paid next to nothing, so you could employ vast numbers of labourers to make sure the place was spick and span. Again, we live in a different world now. And all the properties, of course, were detached along here, and they were all private houses or boarding houses. The fashion for convalescent homes, for student accommodation, for dividing them up into flats, that was a long way off. And you can see again, these are prints, these are sketches, they're not photographs. The huge house, Mr. Cox, who was a local developer, there in Glentworth Hall, which was lamentably demolished in the 1970s for what must be one of the, I hope nobody, this is where I get into trouble, for one of those ugly brick blocks, Glentworth Court. Anyone live there? No, it's okay. I remember giving a lecture on one occasion, and I put a photograph of a house. I said, this is absolutely awful. It should never have been built. And the person in the audience said, I live there. Oh my God. And again, these shelters were designed. The remnants of that one's still with us. That has long since gone. And it does seem that people are happy to walk in the road, which is a bit different now, I would think. And you can see now we're moving up to the thatched cottage, the building that became the county hotel. It seems to be that there's no keep to the left. And moving right the way down then to the Grand Pier area of today, we see these beach lawns. And lawns which were initially laid out just as grass, nothing manicured about them, with a short wall around, and initially for the benefit of the people whose properties abutted the gardens. But it was impossible to police that. Everybody who came wanted to go on the lawns, and so very quickly they just became public lawns, and the council took over responsibility for them. And the seafront actually opened in 1880. Well, the promenade and the beach lawns opened in 1885, there was a bit of a satirical publication that went around. And I'll just read this to you. The history of the public opening of the grand seafront scheme at Weston-super-Mare, 1885, by Cock Robin, author of We Opened the Clifton Suspension Bridge, The Legend of the Little Black Boy, not very diplomatic that, The Mare at Sea, Hans Breitman at Weston-super-Mare, etc., etc., dedicated to the town commissioners of Weston-super-Mare, price sixpence. And this was a satirical, friendly satirical expose of the opening of the new seafront at Weston. This is what it actually was like. This is a photograph. This is the only photograph I can find of the seafront wall actually being built. You can see all the stonework. It looks more as though there's been a storm and the whole thing's been washed away. This is actually in the process of being built. And this photograph at Glentworth Bay, you can see coming around like Claremont vaults here, and the boy down on the rocks there, children up here, and this is Scone's wonderful wall, just angled perfectly. And it's resisted the full force of the tides and the waves, virtually unscathed ever since. And here you see this photo. Notice Glentworth Bay, of course, is a shingle bay, not sand. There's only sand at Marine Lake because we dump it there. It should be a shingle bay. That's what it was, and that was a natural bay. And you can see from this photograph then. I think my battery is beginning to wear.
I can.
Okay. And this is a scene now that we will all be able to recognise, won't we? The only difference here is that the shingle is there where today it's sand, and the clothes that people are wearing. And the rest hasn't changed. The rockery plantations have grown up. That shelter is still there. These properties are still here, albeit they've changed their uses, and they've got fronts, and they've done that ghastly thing of painting. And they've painted the frontages. Once you do that, there's no going back. A rather delightful romantic painting in the museum collection. You can see the promenade here, again overlooking Glentworth Bay. Arthur's Tower still there. You can see the Tower of Emmanuel Church in the distance, and of course the coal fires. So this is obviously an autumn winter scene, isn't it?
Did that building ever exist at Marston?
Oh yes, this is Arthur's Tower, which was a hotel, and that was taken down at the beginning of the 20th century for the building of Knightstone Baths and Knightstone Theatre. That was the place where the people who came for the water cure in Dr. Fox's bathhouse could stay. And that's where he looked after, particularly those whose mental capacity was being challenged and they needed the benefit of sea air. And as I said previous lecture, Dr. Long Fox was way ahead of his time in recognising that people with mental disorders should be treated just the same as people with physical disorder. It's just part of disorder. And it took over 100 years for the rest of the world to wake up to what Long Fox was doing. And quite rightly, his name is immortalised in the Long Fox unit at the hospital today. And here's another view looking down from Wellington Hill down to what today would be the Claremont Vaults. Again, Wellington Hill, that was an interesting hill because that was the way up if you wanted to go along the toll road. But it became increasingly difficult for horses with carriages to use it because the wheels would spin, the horses' hooves would come adrift, and so they had to build a new road in order to make it less steep for the horses, and that became Birkett Road, which goes up by the old pier and then goes up the bottom side of the Prince Consort Garden. So the horses could cope with that, but they could not cope with the Wellington hillside. Mm-hmm. And again, this is a slightly later watercolour, same view, looking down again to the lake and the horse-drawn traffic. This hotel, it's a block of flats now. This is the Addington Hotel, and it's there where Alfred Leet, the artist, lived. Leet, Your Country Needs You. He was a boy in Weston. His family owned that hotel, and he started his artist career as a lad at school in Weston. And so that's one of the most iconic artists in the world. With that poster comes from there. Right. And these photographs, I mean, this is a photograph. This is not a print sketch. It's showing how bare it is to start with. Obviously, it takes a long time for an open space to mature. And we witness the same thing, don't we, here at the Italian Gardens, where some people write letters, say, oh, where are all the trees, where are all the... Oh, hang on. It's just the same thing. You have to wait for something to mature. And gradually it does. The walkways in the gardens change somewhat now. Scone thought that's what people would want then, just to be able to sit on the benches or walk down the steps. Gradually, as more and more people came to live in Weston, more and more people came to visit Weston, so we needed more things for people to do, and the original ideas began to change slightly. A shelter goes up. People want shelters. Again, these extremely well-designed Victorian ideas. So the shelter should allow you to sit in any direction, so that if the wind is blowing, you can be on that side. And if the wind isn't blowing and you want to look at it, so you can move around depending on where the sun is, what the wind is doing, and they were very well thought out designs. And again, you can see, can't you, here, this is Wentworth Hall. Prince's buildings are still there. That's gone. And these buildings are still here. And again, designing out like this so that people could sit in these curved areas. And again, you can see from this photograph quite clearly the rockeries are beginning to develop. Okay, the flagpole's gone, that shelter's gone, that shelter's still there. And another shelter there is where the lifeboat station is, the container, the ship's container. And this is the whole gamut of a seaside. The town wants to make it attractive so that more and more people will come here. And if more and more people come here, more and more money will be spent. That's the whole thing, isn't it? So you make the place attractive and you bring people in. And quite clearly, this is the sort of capacity that all the local hoteliers and the shopkeepers would have wanted, and it's what the local hoteliers today dream of, but it ain't coming back in that way. Life has changed. And you can see, I mean, there's not a seat available, is there? This is 100% occupation, and so a lot of money was being made in Weston at this time. You can see from here as well, transport. This is the tram line. The tram line which came from the power station in Locking Road all the way to the Odeon, went around the corner into Oxford Street, up to the seafront. One branch turned left to the sanatorium, one branch turned right up to Burnbeck Pier. It's just a letter T. And that remained with us until 1937, when we became very modern and let omnibuses take over. And again, we can see, I think I might have shown one of these before, but these lovely wicker, I wish somebody would bring them back onto. I've never seen them anywhere else. These quite where they put them at night time, I have no idea. It's not like deck chairs, you can just stack them all up. But they were I'm sure they were really comfortable, and you could just turn them around as you wanted to. And of course, people were a bit more sensible then than we are now about exposure to sunlight, weren't they? I mean, this is obviously the summer, but they've all got their parasols or umbrellas. And, partly social, because the idea of getting a dark skin meant that you were sort of working class. You would have been out in the fields or a fisherman, therefore you need to keep a pale skin. It's only in retrospect we realise actually that was quite healthy. Now we go and burn ourselves and then wonder why we're getting all sorts of nasties and have to be cut off. 1885, here we now have one of the first oil paintings of the promenade itself. We don't know who the artist is, but it's a reasonable. And again, if you look at very little has changed. This is still the way down onto the beach. That today is the Cabo just around here. That's the County Hotel. That shelter's gone, but it's been replaced by a 1920s-30s shelter, which is now a little cafe as well. So we can still recognise these things, can't we? Again, the elegance of the promenade, the ubiquitous fountains, of course, which had to be everywhere, horse troughs, fountains. I've always thought a great pity we've lost them all, because these things, we don't need cattle troughs and horse troughs, I know, so we've got rid of them, but it's a pity we don't have one or two of them left around. Yes, Johnny?
I know questions aren't supposed to be, but the question is, were there natural springs in Weston?
Yes.
Especially in Grove Park?
Yes, 3. One in Grove Park, one where the Cairo Hotel was later built at the bottom of Highbury Hill, and one at Spring Cove by what is today the old pier. 3 natural springs. Most other people had wells, of course.
Thank you.
And then the promenade again. You can tell it. By this time, dress was a little dour. It was a little dark. Quite how you managed to. Well, you couldn't imagine anyone in this photograph actually being frivolous on the beach, could you? But again, it's fascinating to read some of the accounts in the newspapers of that era. The beachside misbehaviour was incredibly exciting. Compared with today, the young people today, they're pathetic. They don't do anything. They go out to Regent Street on a Saturday night and they drink too much and they thump each other and then they go back to bed or go to A&E. But compared with the Victorian days, they really knew how to entertain themselves with fisticuffs. And the women, I'm sorry girls, but the women's behaviour on the seafront was appalling. Appalling.
You haven't been out and watched in a while. It's always this.
I make no comparisons. I'm just stating fact. And the beach lawns. This is my favourite photograph of the beach lawns. They're clearly taken from the Grand Atlantic Hotel. And doesn't it show the simple elegance? The idea of the beach lawn, it's not really a beach, it's a beach field, isn't it? With a wall around it. And nobody's planted those shrubs, they've just sort of sprung up. But there is an order to it. And it looks suspiciously as though that road has been specially cleaned for the photograph. I'm sure with horses on it all the time, it would not have looked like that all the time. But a very lovely photograph. With a lot. Victorians really love their shrubberies, and you can see that. Easy to maintain, you see. You can't afford gardeners, well, plant bushes, they look after themselves. And this was the great era of pier building, so I'm not going to spend much time on Birnbeck Pier because that's a subject in its own right, but Eugenius Birch, he was the doyen of pier building in Britain, and he built Birnbeck Pier to serve two purposes: as a jetty for boats coming across the channel and for amusement on the island itself. And here you see a steamer off the North Jetty. Again, these shelters, this was all part of the overall concept. And then that South Jetty, which was taken down in 1920, might have been 1923, but it was certainly 1923, just after the First World War. You can see this, I love this photograph, you see that paddle steamer at low water, way down there. And if you wanted to get up onto zigzag up to there, no lift. You know, if you are incapable of climbing stairs, well, that's your problem. We've got people to manhandle you up. Then we enter the Edwardian period. Let's leave the Victorian period and move into the Edwardian era, this frivolous, this Gilbert and Sullivan time. First thing in Weston is the building of the Grand Pier, or the Regent Street Pier. Regent Street, because it's next to Regent Street. And 7th of November 1903, and very much opposed by the directors and shareholders of Birnbeck Pier, because this was a direct challenge to their business. And the two pier companies, they fought tooth and nail, hammer and tongs, whatever. They fought against each other, both building ridiculous extensions. Birnbeck Pier, the South Jetty. This pier building another jetty twice as long as the present pier is. Ended up with both companies going bankrupt. It was just stupid. But here, I mean, this is wonderful, isn't it? The crowds on the seafront. There's a great steam hammer. And this today is the Sandringham Hotel. That's the back of the Sovereign Centre, and well, those buildings are all still there. And that's everybody gathered on the beach. Great thing, of course, in towns in those days, when something happened, everybody turned out, because it was a party, that was the thing, that was happening. Now we all sit at home and watch it on television, and the only time you all go out en masse is if a hotel or a pier is burning, and then everybody goes. Or if there's an enormous tide, and the police have warned on local television nobody should go on the prom, everybody gets in the cars and goes to the prom. But then everybody turned up for these things. And the Grand Pier itself, well, I mean, this to me really typifies that Edwardian frivolous stuff. I mean, just look at it. Is this New Delhi? Is it somewhere? This is the Raj, isn't it? You expect to see the King Emperor on his elephant coming up here taking the salute. It's sort of wedding cake. It's icing. It's push it and it'll all fall down. It's a Hollywood set, isn't it? A bit like going to Sidmouth today. Really. 10 o'clock at night. Sidmouth is a lovely place. Go there 10 o'clock at night. There's nobody there. You could push the entire town. It will fall down like a pack of cards. So here, but beautiful stuff. But just built of cardboard and bits of wood and bits of metal. It's not meant to last. Of course, they didn't last. But I think it's so imperial and imperious and Gilbert and Sullivan. It's hugely amusing. And inside, of course, it was a theatre, not an amusement arcade. This is where people went to the theatre. Going to the theatre was the new thing. It was light-hearted. You could go to serious opera here, and you could go to frivolous music. This is all part of the new entertainment. And then, coming back to your point, Johnny, on Nightstone Island itself, Dr. Fox's bathhouse wasn't making sort of that. We've sort of moved away from the health resort thing. People more interested now in just having a good time. And theatre doesn't think of good times. So Nightstone Island, Arthur's Tower was demolished. Nightstone Island itself was extended. So the island now is much larger than the natural island. It was created. And on the created bit of the island, they built a theatre. And this is, clearly you can see the workman here, this is getting towards the end of the building. Just the same today, except that frontage has no longer, hasn't survived. I certainly don't ever remember it being there. But again, there was money to be made out of theatres. It's very difficult now, but then everybody went to the theatre. What else could you do at night? And inside, this is the inside of the Nightstone Theatre. I'm not going to show anything about how buildings have changed to this generation. That'll be for the final lecture. This is entirely as they were. That's the inside of Nightstone Theatre. Good variety, seaside, slapstick and tickle, and this is what it was all about, having a good time, and not too expensive. And that's next door, the baths, Nightstone Baths, again in this solid Edwardian style. Not some Victorian architecture was very, very claustrophobic. You go into Victorian houses, lots of little rooms and pokey, and this is much more expansive. And up on the top, what better person to put up there than the knight from Nightstone, who was reckoned to have been over 7 foot high. A Roman skeleton was found. Unfortunately, we've since lost it, so we can't prove it. But when I say we've, don't blame North Somerset. We haven't just lost it. He hasn't been around for some time, but certainly a skeleton was discovered. And the other thing, if any of you live in houses where you've got original marble fireplaces, and if you've got any marble with black fleck in it, it was probably quarried on Nightstone rock. That's where the local marble came from. In terms of quality, it's pretty cheap marble, but it is local. So if you've got it, then keep it. In the 1970s, people were knocking them out and flattening over. Horrid era. Anyhow, right, I digress. And opening the baths. People in those days would go. I mean, many of us will remember the Nightstone Baths, won't we? And you went there to watch swimming competitions, watch water polo competitions, and this is clearly the opening day. And I'm sure the mayor must be up there somewhere ready to dive in and take the first plunge. And, yeah. Okay, right. And Glentworth Bay. This is the final look at Glentworth Bay as it was when it was in its natural state. So, into the 1920s, this interwar period now, we've lost Edward VII, we've gone into the First War, we've come out of the First War, and we're now trying to regain interest in life. So, here we have Glentworth Bay. We've got a problem in Weston in that day trippers tend to come at the wrong time of day, and the tide is out. What can we do to keep the water in? and it's obvious what we could do. But we needed something to help us finance that. And the government came along. Do you want to?
Sorry, yes, sorry.
So government came along with some ready cash. It wasn't because it wanted to spend money. It came because we're less than a decade after the Russian Revolution. Government is very, very worried about insurrection in the country, particularly amongst the mining communities, the ironworking communities, left-wing propaganda, left-wing politics. All the thing is getting just a bit uncomfortable for the state. And on top of which, of course, the economy is beginning to tumble, and we're getting ready for the awful Jarrow marches, and this is an awful time. But seasides, as I said earlier, are able to ride the storm of these economic woes. And here, government said to every seaside town in the country, can you think of a way of creating a job creation scheme which will employ people? And here's the money to help do it. So Weston came up with the idea of creating a marine lake, and we could bring unemployed Welsh coal miners over to work. So if they're working, they're occupied, they're earning money, they're tired at the end of the day, they won't cause revolution. That was the theory. Whether it worked or not, I don't know. We certainly didn't have revolution, did we? So it seems well. This is the first idea of a marine lake. The causeway, where it is today, from Anchorhead across to near Anchorhead, across to Maidstone Island, with a very intricate beachside area with terraces on lawns and different bits sticking out here where you could swim and dive. Then they realised this scheme was actually a bit too expensive, so we have to cut it down. This always happens when you have a grand idea. You come up with a grand plan and then you water it down a bit and bit. Just like the fountain out there, which was originally going to have coloured lights and music, but the cost is, so you have to cut your cloth accordingly. And here is the scheme as was published in the Western Gazette in 1927. You can see the shape of today's marine lake with the 825-foot causeway. So this is it says the marine lake, Mr. F.C. Lewin's sketch shows the completed scheme providing for a bathing and boating pool, widening of the parade, new bandstand shelter, concrete wall is being erected. So the prom was actually going to be pushed out a bit into the sea. And many of us, again, will remember that promenade which moved slightly out of the lake. It was on stilts, and underneath is where you change. But actually, it was pretty dank underneath, pretty horrid. But that was the 1920s, and you'll remember the big storm we had in 1981 or something like that. It damaged all of that, and that was all taken away. And then we returned the wall to its original Victorian wall. But this is as they intended it at the end of the 1920s, and that's what we achieved. So here they are building it. This is and you imagine, you've got to do it when the tide is out, and then the tide comes in, you've got to get the concrete in there, let it dry, get back in for the next. So here's some sort of supervisor there with his pipe. This man must be Mr. Lewin, the boss, in his +4s, and these are the Welsh miners pouring the concrete in, and it worked. It worked. I mean, we all remember. Okay, the causeway has changed. It's a better one now, but it worked. And this is what it ended up looking like. And this is the extended promenade. You can see the supports and the pathway on top of it. So here's the original Victorian wall, which is the current wall. This all projected out over it. And there were water chutes. You could dive. The only snag with trapping the water is that you also trap the mud. And over the years, but of course labour was cheap, so they could afford to employ people who manhandled, they shoveled the mud out at the end of every season, over the causeway, out into the sea. Until fairly recent times, when to do that was just so expensive. So this is what This is what, and here, Dr. Fox's bathhouse, still there. That's where Arthur's Tower was. This bit of the island is a new section. And down here, more 1920s buildings, lavatories. There was a little zoo at one point, some of you may remember. And you paid to go in there. Well, you were meant to. It was theoretically sixpence, I remember as a child, but you know, who could stop you getting in by so? I'm not sure how many people ever bothered paying their sixpence to get in, but there we are. And I managed to find this, the actual plan, and photographed that. Okay. So it ended up. These are two postcards. It ended up. You can see if you can pick out the ants. Those are people. There were thousands of people. This was hugely popular. You can see around here, absolutely thronging with people. Look at them all on the water chute there. It was a genuinely popular venue, very much so. And this is what it became, of course, as we will all remember. So we carry on through the 1920s. We're into the Roaring Twenties. Right? This is the era of letting your hair down. Roaring Twenties, jazzy 30s. What better place to illustrate that than in the Winter Gardens Pavilion? And here is the new pavilion opening. Daily orchestral music, the dancehall, full London cabaret, morning orchestra, coffee, afternoon, the dancehall, full cabaret, evening, special dances, full cabaret, novelty nights, the London Frivolities Dance Band, finest ballroom in the country, lighting effects, unequalled anywhere, American bar. This is Weston. Okay, so we've got the Marine Lake. The next thing, 2 years later, is this building or the next building. Right. And what had Weston been used to up until then? Well, the only theatre really, apart from a Nightstone Theatre, was also this winter and summer garden halfway down the boulevard. At what is now Tivoli House, that block of flats. This was the Tivoli Theatre. There it is. And there were summer and winter gardens. The council said we need to have facilities for people out of season who can come here and enjoy Weston in the winter, in the autumn. And so the idea of public gardens began to develop. And this one, yeah, no, that's fine. Here is the actual plan for the Winter Gardens Pavilion. This is 1924. It wasn't built. This is the Royal Field. It's called the Royal Hotel Field Improvement. It actually didn't have the name Winter Gardens by then. It was just literally this pavilion. And it says, I'll read it. The above is a reproduction of a sketch plan of the improvement scheme which is to be applied to the Royal Hotel Field. The elevation depicted faces the Marine Parade. The estimated cost of the scheme is £15,000. And Messrs Mawson, landscape architect of London, and Harry Brown, the town surveyor, are the architects. Now, two important characters here. Mawson, Thomas Mawson, was probably, arguably, the country's leading public garden creator. So he was a really important person. Harry Brown was the council surveyor, who was incredibly able. No such thing about putting it out to tender or checking with Europe. Harry sat at his office and his desk and drew out the plans. And this is what they came up with. And this is something which appeared a little later in Great Western Railway. This is British Railway advertising. Next one. And you can see in more detail the idea that we have this pavilion facing the seafront, and behind it we develop summer and winter gardens. So the pavilion and the gardens. Mind you, it wasn't all plain sailing, because the council had to put a compulsory purchase notice on the owners of the Royal Hotel in order to acquire the field for this development. So it wasn't an easy exercise, but the council was determined to do it, and did. And it was in a minute, Johnny. It was in this era of new style architecture. So it embraced the new style, sort of slightly Art Deco, slightly Georgian post office, and using local workmen. I mean, these wonderful Crowan green uplighters, copper uplighters. If you go to the ballroom now, you'll see the college has restored them back to their pristine condition. They're shimmering in brightness there now. And we've got them in the old council chamber in the town hall, still that colour. So where the college leads, the council will follow. Discuss. And all these features are very much part of the style. And all the big events that we expect in a ballroom like this. The chrysanthemum shows, tennis behind, ballroom dancing, and the college principal's favourite sport, wrestling. All of these events taking place so that the Winter Gardens Pavilion becomes a great social mecca. This is where everybody wants to go. And the building of it, amazing, with these steel girders putting up like that. And all around it's a unity. It's an integration of the building and the land around it, with these gardens, tennis courts, rose gardens, sunken gardens. This was meant to be an English garden terminating at an Italian garden, and that was the overall style. And you can see. And here we're moving down towards across the English garden, which became a putting green, over the balustrade, which came from Beddington House in Croydon, into the new Italian garden. It's only called an Italian garden because of the Italianate balustrade. That's what gives it the name. And this is where people come to watch things. We hear what could be more English than Morris dancing on the lawn there, tennis there, and people playing bowls here. But if you look carefully, I suppose it's appealing to a particular age group, rather than being a broad group. And gradually things begin to change as market demands change. But this is what we all grew up to appreciate. The facade, the front of it, altered dramatically over the decades, but I'm not going to deal with that in this lecture. And the back, of course, the fish pond. This was a Mawson style. He'd used it elsewhere. People liked walking around these ponds and looking at the goldfish. And the English garden itself, this is what it was like. Now, you look at that, and I can count probably 3 or 4 people. So it wasn't hugely used. Yeah. And this is the opening of the Italian garden. This is a 1925 photograph. Very formal, very continental. Again with the balustrading there, and these little box hedges there to keep people off the lawn. You know, this was the era of don't get on the grass, keep away, don't do this, don't do that, stay at home. Different now. And that's probably, as many of us will remember it, a couple of children actually venturing onto the grass, naughty things. So we then move on to the next great phase. This is still the interwar period. 1936, Weston-super-Mare, having built the Marine Lake, having built the Winter Gardens, having built the pavilion, decides it'll go one stage further, it'll build its own airport. And so we raise a rigged 40,000 people living in Weston, half the present population. We decide to build an airport. Could you imagine the council today saying, we're going to build an airport? Well, what do you ratepayers think? Not only did they build this airport at Weston, Harry Brown was the architect, good old Harry, but it became, within 1 year, the second busiest airport in England. In England, Bristol's airport at Whitchurch was a pathetic piddly little thing that nobody bothered with. You came to Weston-super-Mare to fly around the country, but also if you wanted to fly to Paris, you flew from Weston. This was a serious aerodrome, a serious player in the new fashion for going by plane. And Weston was there. As the fashion was evolving, Weston said, we want to be part of this game. And these are the planes that you flew in. And this wonderful sort of Art Deco terminal building. I haven't got a photograph of the portico at the front is said to have come from the original county school in Nithsdale Road. But I have never ever seen a photograph of the county school in Nithsdale Road. If anyone has access to one, I would love to see it. But here are the planes. Look at this. Western Airways, Western Super. These are the things. Grass runway. The concrete runway didn't come until the war. And look at this wonderful leaflet. 36,000 air passengers have travelled at Weston's airport, the flying centre of the west of England. Weston to Cardiff, 10 minutes. Weston to Birmingham, 40 minutes. Weston to Paris, direct, 150 minutes. Air charters anywhere. Airport entirely open to the public, fully licensed restaurant. This is self-confidence on a big scale. And here we are, entering the Art Deco era with I think this is my favourite poster. This is actually a poster. I've adulterated it to give the other message on the right-hand side. But isn't this oozing sophistication? It's the cocktail glass. It's not the pint of beer down Weatherstones. This is real quality stuff. They know, their marketing people know who they're appealing to. And this one is a railway poster. And this is what we were about to build. The next phase. Having opened the airport one year, we decided the next year we'll build something else. We'll build an open-air swimming pool. Here's a photograph of it being built. And this is what it ended up like. This was our swimming pool. Now, of course, this was the era of the Lido, the open-air pool. We've got to put it into context. People didn't mind the cold. People swam in cold water. People dived into cold water. It was the growth of the era of the body beautiful, the Nazi, the whole thing about manly prowess. Nowadays it wouldn't work. I can remember as a youngster going in the pool and hating it. It was cold. It was absolute. We all go blathering on romantically about how lovely it was. No, it wasn't. It was damn cold. We hated it. We were in the water for 3 minutes and got out again. But it looked attractive. It was really good Art Deco architecture. And on a hot day, it was wonderful. And how many hot days did we have out of 365? Quite. So it made a loss. But it was a beautiful design. Harry Brown again. Yep. And this was the pièce de résistance. This was the diving stage. Weston said, not only do we want an open-air pool, not only do we want a diving stage, but actually we want the highest diving stage in Europe. Not in England, in Europe. And it was 40 feet high. The water was 15 feet deep. This was saying to the Côte d'Azur, come to Weston-super-Mare. You don't need to go to the south of France. Again, unbelievable self-confidence. But it was all pointless in a way, because it never, ever paid for itself. It just became more and more of a sink for the money. Beautiful building. And the people who were attracted here, well, Diana Dawes, she rose to fame as a 17-year-old girl whose name was Diana Fluck, and she changed it to Dawes, for reasons which may or may not be understood, and won her beauty contest at the age of 17 by pretending she was actually 18 or 19. And she was projected meteorically into worldwide fame from Weston's open-air pool. Laurel and Hardy were there regularly as entertainers. And why is Emperor Haile Selassie there? Well, because during the last war, when Abyssinia had been invaded by the Italians and we rescued Haile Selassie, he came to live in Bath, and he used to enjoy nothing more than coming down to Weston during the summer and joining the queue at the open-air pool to pay his half crown to go in to have a swim. And every time the flunkies saw the Emperor of Abyssinia in the queue, oh, Your Majesty, come. No, 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 no. He said, I'm a guest in your country, I will stay in the queue. And always did. And the rumour was he was about to buy a house in Weston. But then the war came to an end and he went back. So great links between important personalities and the pool in Weston-super-Mare. Bands. These were great Victorian inventions, weren't they? And they carried on right through the era up until fairly recent times. And we like to be a bit retro now, so we've restored it. And this wonderful bandstand in Grove Park. I think I'm right in saying, though I stand to be corrected, it's the only 10-sided bandstand left in Britain. Made in Scotland, beautifully restored, thanks to North Somerset and the Civic Society. And here was the other bandstand in Grove Park, the Grove Park Pavilion. In the 1920s, it's where the car park is in Grove Park. It was bombed in the war and it was all glass, so that came to an end. But another outdoor bandstand. And on the Grand Pier itself, there was a bandstand. Listening to the band was hugely popular. And the Cove Pavilion, around Marine Lake, this became a music garden. It became more and more popular to go and sit there. And this, I think, is a beautiful bit of curvaceous 1930s. Are they signalling the end? Or?
No, it's automatic lights.
Oh, right.
No, not for a while.
Right. And here you would sit in the deck chairs and the band would play. There were lots of orchestras and bands. It was live music, just as live music is popular again, but different sort of live music. And looking down, this was the Roselle Hotel. Trams, so this is pre-1937, and you can see this wonderful music garden. This today is the edge of the Marine Lake. That was the overhang. All of this was severely challenged during the storm of '81. And the Dutch oven. This predated it. This is where the band played, and the people just sat there. That shelter became many years later the restaurant, the Cove restaurant, the Cove. So there, it was only built as a shelter. It was never built as a restaurant. And wonderful wandering along there in the evening. Of course, it's a bit idealised, isn't it? The sun is always, it's always nice and warm. But again, in terms of marketing, this is the way we were marketing Weston. We're into the 20s, 30s. Again, it's sophisticated. It's roaring 20s, jazzy 30s, and so it went on into our time. Cinemas were becoming hugely fashionable. They were starting to destroy theatre. People going to the new movies. And here in Weston, we had the Gaumont Cinema, which originally was called the Regent Cinema because it is in Regent Street. That's no longer there. It's now Yates Wine Bar. It was lamentably demolished when the facade at least should have been kept. Great thing about the cinema, it was all make-pretend, wasn't it? You had this wonderful frontage, and you had this sort of make-pretend inside, and then the lights went down, it didn't matter, you were watching the film. It was all about make-pretend. So you thought you were really going out to this ornate pile. Then how many remember the Central Cinema? The Central Cinema, now, this today, this was taken in 1921. Sorry, no, it was built in 1921. This was photographed in 1961 when it was being demolished. That today is being replaced by a cinema. On this side, it's the Duke of Oxford pub. This is the fire station, which will become the new Costa Coffee corner opposite the new Church Square by Emmanuel. So, 1961, we pulled the cinema down. 2017, we're building a cinema in exactly the same spot. So that's the Central Picture House. Now this one, the Pedlar. This was Weston's first movie cinema. Okay, it looks a bit sort of church hallish, doesn't it? So let's get rid of this. We're into an Art Deco era, so let's put a proper cinema there. And the Odeon. Oscar Deutsch entertains our nation. This is the great chain of Odeon cinemas, and it's one of, it's obviously of that era. Cecil Howitt, the country's greatest Art Deco cinema architect, came to Weston and gave us this. It oozes the confidence of the 1930s, doesn't it? With these brick wrap-around things and the covered balconies. This is actually the first film, Jack Buchanan, Bruce Dominion. Yeah. And a wonderful. See, in those days, all the strip neon lighting, it must have looked magnificent. And I long to see the whole of that centre area with strip lighting restored in purple and green and pink. And that's what Art Deco's about. And that just for the want of a bob or two, how could it get it done? It would look great. And it's advertising the Compton organ. Bit of that in a minute. Yep. Because inside is the Compton organ. Now, there are only 2 of these left in England in the cinemas for which they were designed. One is the Odeon Leicester Square, and the other is the Odeon Weston-super-Mare. This one has been fully restored, the J Moulds work, it rises from a pit, and they have concerts on a Sunday. One of only 2 left in the country in the cinemas for which they were built. It's a work of art. It's a work of art. Do we celebrate it? No. But we're just beginning to appreciate Art Deco stuff, aren't we? We have repainted the buildings in the centre in those Miami colours. And if you look carefully, you'll see inside the shop entrances all these wonderful bits of Art Deco paving and metalwork. Wonderful stuff. It's interesting when this was being mooted as an idea. I said something in the town hall about how we could do it, and I drew up a plan for it, quite simple with Microsoft, just to paint a picture, isn't it? I got into the Mercury, and I had a phone call from Miami. They had found the Western Mercury. Well, how? Because it turns out there was a part of Miami called Western where they had a problem with some of their Art Deco buildings, and the council people in Miami were sort of Googling, and Western Art Deco came up, Western Mercury, and suddenly they were in Weston Super. So I had to do a live interview via Radio Bristol to Miami, and they were going about this wonderful Art Deco city in which you live. Oh dear. Can you come and give us some advice? Can we come and give it? It was all slightly embarrassing. But you know, we've done it. This cost all the owners of the properties less than £2,000 each to do the entire suite. So it works. Okay. The Grand Pier, of course, burnt down in 1930, so they decided they'd build a new pier in the Art Deco style. But it was unpopular, and the council, prominent citizens criticised council's opposition to pier scheme. Other resorts are ready for keen competition. The council didn't want the pier to be rebuilt in the new Art Deco style. They wanted to rebuild it in its original Edwardian style. Okay. And this is the planning application. And this is actually from that plan that went to the town hall. Somebody's written over it, disapproved by the council. That's the one that was actually built. That's it. That's the Art Deco pier that we have in Weston. And then another Art Deco building, which some of us remember with varied memories, the grammar school. This from the outside, a wonderful looking Art Deco building. Mind you, there was a line down the middle, boys on that side, girls on that side, and never the twain were allowed to meet. This photograph was taken just as it was about to open. Unfortunately, during the war, the girls' side got bombed, and they put up some pretty awful roofing material. Interesting buildings here, the caretakers' houses, because they were used as the model for the new police houses which were next to the police station, which were then taken down in 1970 with an awful block which became the police station. The big chunky central chimneys. Yep. And of course the courthouse, all part of this Art Deco era of 1934. Seasides are full of ideas for doing things, many of which never leave the drawing board. It's something about the seaside that encourages, whether it's vanity, whether it's flimsy thinking, I don't know. But every so often we come up with harebrained ideas. Here was one to build a wall all the way from Knightstone right the way down to the sanatorium to enclose the sea. That became the Marine Lake, and then there was going to be a jetty out from the Marine Lake for ships to tie up. That scheme never left the drawing board. They hadn't worked out quite how they would deal with the mud or the sewage. So let's have another one. Here's another scheme that goes, you can see here, that's the Grand Atlantic Hotel. This is going to be another huge wall, and people are going to come in through these new amusement arcades. It will be on the beach, and everyone will have a great time. 550 yards long. People put money into it. It failed. It didn't leave the drawing board. Here was another one. This is the Grand Atlantic Hotel, a nice big round one, Regent Street there, Edinburgh Park there, so huge. Again, nice map. It didn't leave the map. So let's build a tower. Let's get Mr. Thomas Warwick in, who builds towers all over the country, and we'll build a Western revolving tower. So you go up the tower, you go like that way up there. Nice drawing, didn't leave the drawing board. Then Mr. Brenner, who acquired the pier, decided he wanted to, on the new pier, where the existing pavilion was, he wanted to widen it and put a concert hall on that side and a nice Ringhall Theatre on that side. That didn't leave the drawing board. Getting a little closer to our own time, 1991, there was a proposed Ocean Earth project, which got everyone very excited, front page of newspapers, and that's as far as it went. Even more recently, the Snowdome, which we were promised was going to be the largest artificial indoor snow ski centre in England, and well, that's the drawing, and that didn't seem to materialise. The Eden Hotel, which was going to be built on the seafront, Art Deco era, that didn't materialise. And neither did the Grand Central Hotel. Well, the Grand Central Hotel did materialise, but not in this great London style. This was going to be a really big pucker by Sir Henry Tanner, 1924, who had designed the Savoy. So they're bringing big architects in. Or in the 1970s, a replacement for what was still known then as the Beach Hotel opposite the Grand Pier. Awful so, it looks same style as the police station, identical, so you imagine what that would have looked like. And the end of the terrace where the Grand Central Hotel was, where that area had been removed, this was an idea 10 years ago, which again didn't leave the drawing board. Then we come to the Tropicana. Well, let's go quickly through this. Next one. Next one. I mean, we're now into real fantasy land, aren't we? Carry on, carry on. I have never in my life come across such nonsense as has been spouted in Weston over the Tropicana. And talking of nonsense, let's go to Wahid Samadi and the Royal Pier Hotel. This is his plan for a 10-storey block of flats. Nothing's been built, nothing's happened, and he owes the council 120,000 quid and he's going bankrupt. Move on. Same fellow is interested in Burndeck Pier. Here are some wacky ideas for the pier. A bullet train. Yeah, sure. With a great tall... Thanks. Carry on. He had an idea to build flats out on Burndeck Island and to build flats jutting out into the sea there, and his Royal Pier Hotel there. All nonsense. Yep. And look at these ideas. Don't laugh. Carry on. Carry on. Now this. I mean, really, this. Can anyone take some of these people seriously? Carry on. So, let's have a look at the really. I'm doing my usual thing, running out of time. I've left the most important thing to the last 10 minutes. But here, just after the war, when there'd been a lot of damage, and Victorian architecture was very much out of fashion. And the idea was to sweep away all this awful past and let's go for the brave new world. And so, what better thing to do in Weston than bring in two of the country's greatest planners? One, the Honourable Lionel Brett, who became 4th Viscount Esher, President of the Royal Institute of Town Planning, and Sir Bertrand Clough Williams Ellis, Fort Merriam claim. They came to Weston and they designed a new Weston, a garden city by the sea. I've since colour-coded, all the stuff was damaged, gone in the war, but I've colour-coded and redrawn the map. It was to sweep away all of Victorian Weston. A dual carriageway up through Fields, that's the gasworks. Dual carriageway along what is now Clevedon Road, get rid of all those nasty Victorian properties. Dual carriageway right up to the open air swimming pool. Edinburgh Park, get rid of Edinburgh Crescent, build a new railway station. Road down the middle of Edinburgh Park, hotels at the end. Alexandra Parade, extend it right the way around to the new railway station. Where Tesco's is, build a huge bus station. And the boulevard along here, knock down one side of it, turn it into a dual carriageway with a new road going straight through the seafront. It was all high-rise blocks and dual motorway type roads. And carry on. And in more detail, the gasworks there, Coach Park, repositioned railway station, Edinburgh Park there, blocks of flats. All these blue lines are tall blocks of flats. Town Hall there, seafront apartments. Carry on. In more detail. That today is Locking Road Car Park. What is that going to become? Residential. What was it planned in 1947? Residential. Tesco's, where the bus station is. And here's the boulevard now, twice as wide, sweeping around. Sorry, college, you wouldn't be there. Straight through there. And I think it was all lost in the war because there was a model. And I cannot, this is just a newspaper, I think. This is a meeting in the town hall with Lionel Brett. And this is the model. Now, you won't be able to identify that, but this is the seafront, these tall blocks of flats, a huge new amphitheatre type thing. The Winter Gardens Pavilion to stay there. Let's carry on. So that was lost. Nothing was ever. But in 1961, Chamberlain, Powell and Bond were brought in to create a new Dolphin Square area. So Dolphin Square was demolished, and this was their new idea. Grand Atlantic Hotel here, tall blocks of flats again, 20-odd storey hotel. Go into the museum. That model is now in the museum. It's fascinating. So carry on. This is what it was going to be. I've improved these drawings. Here's the beach lawns, the bus station as was, town hall here. Here, Emmanuel Church there. This is Oxford Street, and this would be Walliscote Grove Road. Tall apartment blocks, great conference centre, seafront hotel, town hall, Emmanuel Church. This is Oxford Street. There's the big hotel, and the conference centre in scale with Emmanuel Church. This is where the new cinema is going up today. Now, if you think that's tall, this was going to be considerably taller. Carry on. Nothing was built. Nothing was built. But Dolphin Square was demolished, and so a watered-down Dolphin Square was then built. Now, occasionally you come across real people who try to do things, and if they had succeeded, what would Weston be like now? In this house called Swiss Villa, which nowadays, I'll show you on the next map, this is where Sir Eardley and Lady Wilmot lived. He was a chum of Brunel. Next one. This is Locking Road. This today is Swiss Road, and this is Stafford Road. This was Swiss Villa there, and the grounds of Swiss Villa. So he was a wealthy chap. That was the big house that stood there. The only house which bears the name that is still there is this cottage, Swiss Cottage, which is just there on the corner. But there's absolutely nothing of the Swiss Villa estate at all. Why was he important? Well, for this reason. The end of Brean Down, where we have the Napoleonic fort, he saw that as a potential harbour. And this was his plan. In 1864, the Brean Down Harbour Scheme, he realised that Weston-super-Mare had a direct, straight line to the east coast of North America. So this was going to be the new harbour. Bristol was upstream, 7 miles up the River Avon, and having increasing difficulty. Liverpool, well, who could give a toss about Liverpool? Weston-super-Mare was going to be the place. So this was going to be the new transatlantic route. Railway line along Brean Down to join the main railway line at Uphill. Had that been built, what would Weston-super-Mare be like today? A derelict former dock, probably. And this is the London Illustrated News cut, Illustrated London News print. You can see the paddle steamers come out. The laying of the foundation stone. It was laid with great ceremony, and it blew away. There was a storm. The whole thing was washed away. Everyone who bought shares went bankrupt. And that was the end of Sir Eardley Wilmot and the Brean Down Harbour Scheme. The Victorians they built some tremendous things, but they also dreamt a lot. And even the church was on the game of being too grand. Generally speaking, any church which wasn't finished by the First World War was not going to be finished. The men came home, those who came home, many had lost their faith, many were no longer going to church because they had to touch their forelock and their employers told them to go. But Weston still persisted in having some really incredible church designs. This was the design for St Paul's Church at Clarence Park. Never ever left the drawing board. I mean, that's a cathedral in scale. St Paul's Church today is huge, but that was much bigger. And in Locking Road, St Saviour's Church, unbelievable, for 800 people. Well, they built it up to there, and then they couldn't afford that, so that bit is now a block of flats. And even up on the hill in Milton, St Jude's Church, which is now the Orthodox Church of St Andrew, there were great plans to extend that as well. And here was the church missing the boat. The congregations were dwindling. And the Methodists, well, they were just as bad as the Church of England. This was the design for Victoria Methodist Church by the Town Hall, looking more like, again, a huge Anglican cathedral. Just imagine the problems the church would have today if they still had these buildings around their necks. And so we come to the end. We come to the reality of life. And next week, I'm going to look at the way in which the architecture that we so love in Weston has played its part in shaping what we feel about Victorian architecture and how heritage is going to help regeneration. So the last one, I couldn't resist, Banks's toilet roll, because I think that says an awful lot about what Seasides are up to. So don't forget, next week it's half term, so your students, you're allowed half term break, and the week after come back for the final thing. And that's spot on. Right, thank you.